It was probably just within weeks of Jody dying. And the people around me were trying to be positive and really going on with conversation and treating me to a lovely dinner, thinking that would lift my spirits. But it didn't, because number one, I couldn't taste the food. And number two, they were all going about their conversation and their plans and sharing as they normally would. I felt like they were on the other side of a moat, all around me, with no drawbridge.
I'm sure many of you identified with Joanne's story.
When we lost our daughter, Hope, we were unprepared for how that would impact our relationships.
While most of our friendships survived and flourished, there were some friends who simply didn't know how to relate to us anymore.
But grief affects more than just your friendships. It also affects your relationships with your spouse and other family members. So today we'll talk about some of the normal ways relationships are strained after the death of a loved one, and what you can do to maintain and strengthen your relationships with family and friends.
Welcome to GriefShare. You may recall a family celebration that took place outside, perhaps at a park like this one. Or maybe you gathered together in your own backyard.
Now that your loved one is gone, those family events feel very different, as they make you very aware that someone you love is not there with you. You may also find that you have new struggles and strains with family members.
If you want to enjoy being with family again after losing someone you love, it's important that you understand this session's first point.
Each member of your family will grieve uniquely.
One of the things we've discovered is that husbands and wives grieve so differently.
I think I dealt with my grief a lot more than Al did. I sought counseling. I read a lot of books about grief.
For instance, Sue could not go back to our home church that our kids had gone to church at for 10 years. She just could not go back after the funeral. She didn't want to be back in that building. On the other hand, my son and I went back to that church for quite a while, continued to worship there.
People definitely grieve differently, and so the things that have been helpful to me are at times helpful for other people and at times not.
Dave wanted to surround himself with kids, Melissa's friends, kids at school. He would go to school events, but I did not want to be with Melissa's friends and with kids that age because it was just so painful.
Al was more submerged in why did Emily die? How did this happen? And when it came, time for us to go out socially, he's more of a pusher. Let's go, we're going to go, we'll be fine, you'll be fine. And I was more, I can't go. I don't want to go.
So what I've had to do, and what we've done together, is allow each other to grieve differently and not to demand something of her. I wasn't about to say, you must go back to our church. That's our church. We love the church. We love the people. But I could not force her to do that.
It didn't bother me that Dave wanted to go spend time with Melissa's friends at school. It gave him great joy to be with them because he felt like he was closer to Melissa.
We had to respect one another's grief if we were going to be able to continue on with our lives.
There's a lot of time in my apartment by myself that I'm just alone.
And that's when it really hit me, when I was alone. It just came in waves.
In our first session, we talked about how natural it is that we deeply miss the person we love who has died.
For widows and widowers especially, the absence of a spouse often causes intense loneliness.
The loneliness I felt after my husband's death was all-consuming.
I felt the most lonely when I was in couples or at an event where there were couples. And that surprised me because I'd been fairly independent and going out to things by myself.
It was crushing.
It was this sense of I am alone here.
When we've lost someone we love and it seems like no one around us fully understands, we can be tempted to isolate ourselves, which only adds to our loneliness.
After my granddaughter died, I buried myself.
My friends, great friends, they asked me to go out, but you feel like a third wheel or a fifth wheel, so sometimes you just, choose to be alone.
I wouldn't talk to people. I wouldn't answer the phone. I wouldn't go anywhere.
I even feel at some points with my daughter, I kind of put up barriers, even with my daughter.
I got pretty upset with people in the beginning for planning things for me. I just wanted to stay locked in my bedroom.
Because it's easier to sit on the couch and have a relationship with the couch than it is to go out and have relationships with others.
I felt like if I could push people away, then if something else tragic in my life happened, it wouldn't hurt anymore.
Just because it's common for people to isolate themselves after the death of a loved one, don't conclude that it's the best way to handle the pain of your loneliness.
There's a real tendency to back away from life once I've lost a loved one. And when I do that, when I quit living, when I act like I've died too, what I end up doing is I just strengthen my loneliness.
When you're going through pain and grief, it's important that you stay connected to the body of Christ. You live in community with other people.
When you are alone a lot and isolate yourself, you begin to think in circular ways. You may have a thought and go round and round and round, and pretty soon it's poured in concrete. And so that's what your truth is. You don't have anybody to break that circular thought. You need to be in a group.
Pushing all my family away just totally left me empty.
I had to make an effort to go out and be with others. I did not want to be one of those persons who was not a part of what was going on. I like to be engaged in whatever activity there is. And so I literally fought through the feeling of going out the door and attending some of these events. And it was tough. There's no question. It's very tough. But I felt that after the first time, the second time, that it would get a bit easier. It took a lot of times before it got easier, but I felt I was called to do that. I wanted to be part of the community I'd been part of for 30 years.
At this point, it would be helpful for us to distinguish between harmful isolation and taking advantage of the benefits of solitude.
I don't really think there's any way people can get through grieving if they're with people the majority of the time.
I'm an alone person, so I get that.
There's a time for solitude. There's a time to be alone with God without the television on, without the radio on, without listening to a tape of a sermon, and just to be really alone, and in the middle of that aloneness to say, who am I right now? What's happening in me?
The grieving process is intensely personal, and not everybody is going to process the same way. Not everyone is going to understand your emotions. And there are just simply times that being alone with God is the only way to really unburden your soul.
Therefore, you cannot depend ultimately on community to do all that needs to be done. You've got to be by yourself in the presence of the only one who knows everything going on inside of you.
Because a lot of it is, with God's help, we have to work through and help ourselves heal. And we have to figure things out on our own. Not by other people's agenda, but by our own.
One time I actually made the time to do that and had my sister come and stay with my girls while I went for just a few days to Lake Michigan and just reflected on what all has happened and just searched for God in it all. At first, I couldn't pray at all. I just felt like the only prayer that I could utter was, "Oh God." And I think that was fine, that God understood that.
By now, you realize no one can fully understand exactly what you're going through.
But God, the one who created you and knows your every thought, is intimately aware of the depth of your pain.
One of the reasons why people don't share, one of the reasons why I sometimes don't share is, you're not going to really hear me. you're not going to know what I'm saying. I'm going to put it this way, and you're going to say, well, Larry, it sounds like you're feeling. I'm going to go, no, not quite. And then I'm tired of this conversation. I don't want to talk anymore. I've got some really close friends. I've got a good community. And I've got a couple of friends that know me very, very profoundly. Every time I have a conversation with them, there's a part of me that's disappointed. Because there's a part of me they can't touch. They can't know all about me, no matter how open I am. And when I go to a community, a friend, a spouse, whoever, a pastor, somehow expecting them to do what God alone can do, I'm going to walk away irritated, disillusioned, disappointed, frustrated, and giving up on what can happen in community. Because wonderful things can happen in community, but not everything.
At that point where I had time alone with him, no distractions, it was just me and him and nature, I could just commune with him. And maybe they weren't lengthy prayers, but I just felt like he was there with me. He was there aching with me and going through these intense grief emotions.
Marnie's story is a helpful example of how you can benefit from solitude. But you don't have to leave town to get alone with God. You can get away with God in a quiet room, in your car, or at a local park. You just need to find a place where you won't be distracted. Use the time you have to read your Bible, pray, work on the exercises in your GriefShare workbook, or anything else that helps you process your situation in light of God's presence and truth.
Can you help me with something?
Not now.
I remember getting very frustrated with people. You know what I mean? Because I wanted them to understand what I was going through.
I was coming through the checkout counter with a rather large basket full of groceries, and the clerk looked at me and said, "What did your wife do to you to make you come and get the groceries?" And I just looked at her and said, "She died."
There were times that I'm sure, yelled. I'm sure there were times I hung up phones on people.
But I think that's representative of the kind of frustration we sometimes have when we're grieving, and we just get, our emotions are frayed and they're on edge, and you just sometimes tend to bury people with honesty.
When we're grieving, we sometimes feel like we have an excuse to snap at others, or feel that we have no emotional resources to draw upon to be patient or kind.
But grief doesn't provide us with an excuse for being rude.
Plus, our harsh words often end up hurting the people who care for or need us the most.
Just because I'm angry at my situation does not give me the right to be angry and aggressive at the people around me.
Christians have to make a distinction between making sure we say the truth, always being candid, telling people exactly how we feel or what has happened, but the way in which we say it is, I think, very important, because the Bible also talks about being hospitable, being kind, being gentle.
Just because there's intensity of emotion doesn't mean that we have the freedom to express it.
Your intense pain is real, but giving them the proper expression helps you in the recovery process, rather than just, here I am, these are my emotions, you deal with it.
We do need to be characterized by love first, self-control first.
Suppose you're a widow, and let's say you're convinced that solitude can help you, so you decide to go to the park and pray.
It's a great idea. But what would happen if you saw an elderly couple enjoying a walk in the park? Or, if you lost a child, what would happen if you saw a dad playing catch with his son?
You might be ashamed to admit it, but you may struggle with feelings of jealousy.
It's very common to see a child the same age as yours and think, I'm never going to have that again. My child died.
That surprised me, how jealous I was of people who still had their spouses and I didn't anymore. Thought it was very unfair.
It's not necessarily the couples that I see at church and that I have been friends with. That's a problem. It's the couples that I see on the street that I don't know. You know, when I'm walking or when they're walking down the street holding hands and that sort of thing, then I kind of, it kind of bothers me.
It's very common
to see a parent and child where the parent isn't reacting the best to that child's misbehavior and think they don't deserve that one.
I was chatting with a girlfriend on the phone, and she was complaining about how messy her husband was leaving the kitchen lately. And it just really irked me, because I thought how I would love to be cleaning up after my husband right now in the kitchen. And I got irritated with her. And I said, I wish I had that problem.
Maybe I was, at the drugstore, the grocery store, and to see a man and woman kind of squabble with each other. Like, I wanted to grab them and shake them and say, but at least you have each other.
Those are common reactions. And it's an opportunity for you to begin to deal with the flaws in your own heart and to begin to realize that God gave you a gift in the person who you did have. God gave you a gift of all the time that you had together, and to be thankful for what you had. It's those anger and jealousy for others are things that God didn't intend for us to do. If the way you've treated others during your grieving process has harmed some of your relationships, here's some advice on how to restore them.
I'm sad sometimes about the way maybe that I behaved. I don't even know if I remember them all because of being in so much grief. I pray that, I ask for forgiveness, of the people that I've hurt, because I would have never wanted to do anything to harm anybody else.
So one of the things that's really, really helpful, Ben, once you begin to come out of that and you start feeling like, I want to be with people again, is just to be honest. Seriously, just honestly. It was really hard for me to try to be with people when I was suffering like that. But forgive me if I hurt you while I was going through that. Wasn't my intention to hurt you, but it was just because I felt like I had to be alone. And now, please, can we try to reestablish this relationship?
Of course, your words, attitudes, or actions may not always be the primary source of difficulty in a relationship.
Sometimes people just don't know how to respond to you when you're grieving. When that happens, it's possible that they withdraw from you.
People had told me that when you lose your spouse, you lose a lot of relationships. I really didn't think that was going to be true for me, but it was.
It's been hurtful because they were always there when he was sick. And I feel like I've just been left alone.
It was interesting when Rick died that some people had the notion that I had more free time and that there was time that they could fill up and do things with me. And so they would say, you must have a lot of time on your hands. Would you like to do this or this or this? And I looked at them and thought, what are they thinking? My spouse wasn't a couch potato. He functioned in this marriage. He did a lot of things to contribute to life. And now I'm one person that has to do the things that two people did in our relationship before. So rather than making life more free, it made it busier and more difficult.
I found that the relationships I had were not what I thought they were.
There's only a select handful of friends that want to acknowledge what we've gone through.
So why do friendships change after the death of a loved one?
Sometimes people simply have to get back to their daily lives. To us, it may feel like abandonment, but they're really just returning to their responsibilities.
One of the more difficult things that we've had to face over this time period has been our association with former friends.
I think it's really hard when people move from the few months after grief to longer than that. It's hard to know why so many people were there for so long and then they're gone. The reality is that they get back to their lives. The death of someone is an enormous interruption into life and into the friends' lives around you. And so they need at some point to be able to move back into their own lives.
I think in our minds, we
have these expectations that these people are going to always be there for us. And it sets our own selves up for disappointment because they do have their lives and they do have their families and they do go on.
If you've lost a spouse, there are some other unique reasons that your friends may be uncomfortable with you.
I have one of my friends, I love this man dearly, but it's different now that I'm single. If we're going to socialize, we go one-on-one. And very rarely does his wife come along because it has presented the third, what I call a third wheel type thing. Is when he and I get together, we can be silly. We're just two little boys. But when his wife's in the picture, then there's a strain. I sense a strain.
And so friendships do change probably for three primary reasons. One of them is that perhaps it's really hard for the other couple to see the widowed person by him or herself because that's painful. They cared about the person who died, and the widowed person is just a real reminder that their friend is now dead. Another reason is that it's not too hard then to say, if this could happen to my friends, it could happen to us as a couple. And that's an unpleasant thought for a lot of married couples, and so they want to shy away from that because they don't want to be in the same boat. And probably a third reason is that it's safe when there's two couples getting together, but when one person is really single now, no longer married or coupled, and really technically available, that person can sometimes be seen as a threat.
So sometimes our friends pull away from us.
Other times, our friends don't avoid us at all. Instead, they miss the way things used to be and pressure us to get back to our old self more quickly than we're ready for.
If this is what you're dealing with, it can help to have a straightforward conversation with your friends, letting them know what you need.
To bring that up in a way like, it seems like maybe this is a little bit uncomfortable and awkward. It's really different for me. I bet it's different for you too.
And you have to be able to say to your real friends, you know, I'd love to be able to do this, but I can't. And so I've got to put some limitations on myself. And it doesn't mean I don't care about you or that I don't want to be with you, but my life is different now. And so I have to handle some things differently.
It can even maybe progress down the pike to, you know, how are we going to continue to do this relationship? And maybe sometimes it's more that the two people of the same sex get together. If you're a female and you're widowed, maybe you and the other woman do more woman things together. If the man feels a little bit uncomfortable because his buddy isn't there anymore to kind of balance things off, or vice versa.
When they want us to be back to our old selves, I think we need to be very honest and say, I will never be back to my old self. I will become a new person, but I will not be the same as you were used to.
I think it's helpful then for widowed people to explain when people think their life is simpler and less time consuming now than what it was before, to simply say, you know, my life really has become more complex. I'm one person doing two people's jobs. That makes it harder.
There was one friend in particular who was upset because I didn't have time to do the things I used to do with her. I didn't have time. We used to play tennis a lot together and I didn't have time for that. There was a lunch meeting that I missed and I just forgot it because I had other things to do, and I apologized and she just felt like I didn't have time for her anymore, and the friendship kind of went by the wayside. And part of that is just knowing that some people won't understand and won't be agreeable to the way your life is right now.
So even your best efforts to maintain your friendships won't work in every case. But as Dr. Smingy mentioned, you will make new friends. You may have already discovered that to be true.
And sometimes new same-sex friendships can be a key to our healing.
A lot of the former friends or the existing friends that I had, when I would meet them, were still seeing me as sort of half a couple. Because every time I would run into them, I would remind them of Shar and her death. And it was only when I began making several new friends, not putting the old ones behind me, but at least making new friends, they were able to see me kind of on my own merits. They'd see me as an individual.
I found a lot of ladies through different various channels that had small children that were alone as well that may have lost their spouse.
And so it wasn't that now here comes a half a person or a half a couple. Here comes Bob DeVries, and here comes this person that we're getting to know pretty well. That I found to be very freeing, kind of exhilarating. It gave me a little more self-confidence, a little more self-esteem, so that I wasn't the wounded half of a couple who was now kind of disintegrating, but that I was a real person in my own right, doing the kinds of things that other people found to be helpful or attractive or at least nice to be with.
And sometimes we don't like to say goodbye to our old friends, but life has a way of making us get new friends.
We kind of isolated ourselves, my husband and I. That was just who we were.
Amy's husband died of a heart attack. After being married for nearly 30 years, she found it hard to build new relationships.
Well, when you're a team for 26 years, you pretty much become each other's best friends. And that's exactly what we were. So we did everything together. We did house chores, we did the yard work, we went food shopping together, we did laundry together, we did everything together. I don't have many friends because he was my friend. I have acquaintances. So it's difficult for me to kind of be vulnerable and reach out and make new friends.
But slowly, Amy realized that to heal from her grief, she needs the help of others.
I'm actually trying to be a little bit more vulnerable. I'm just allowing myself to just say hello and say, hi, I'm Amy. I have joined 2 Bible study groups. So I am involved with those people, with them in their groups, and they have been wonderful. I was able to give my testimony 2 weeks ago at one of the Bible study groups, and I was so excited. They were just so warm and so welcoming, and I thought, what was I so afraid of?
Maintaining relationships after a loved one dies isn't easy. Sometimes, like Amy, we find it easier to isolate ourselves.
But if you try, you'll find that taking the time to make new friends can actually help you heal from the pain of grief.
And what did he say to you?
He told me that I'd get over the death of my son because I had so many other children. Oh, I can't believe that.
And what did you say to him?
When you're at a public park like this one, you don't have much control over the people around you, and sometimes you can be offended by the things you overhear.
Off-color humor, vulgar language, abusive exchanges, you name it.
In a similar way, when you're grieving and you go out in public, you may not be able to avoid the offensive and insensitive things people say.
At Myron's funeral, a woman came through and she said, at least you won't have to potty train him. And I thought, oh, dear lady, I potty trained 10 2-year-olds if I could have my son back.
And I would have friends come to me and actually say, Michelle, where's your faith? Your faith is not strong enough.
When I tell people my mom died at age 69, they'll go, oh, she was really young. I'm not sure how I was supposed to feel about that.
Well, your sister had cancer, so you had time to grieve ahead of time. You had time to prepare yourself. And that just really burned me because I did not want to be grieving when my sister was alive.
I'd hear things like, well, you just need to get a hobby.
Why would somebody say that?
You'll get over it in a year. And it was like, how do you get over the death of your son?
You need to move back to Florida around your family, and you'll leave all this behind, as if some magical change of latitude is going to change this attitude.
The most insensitive comment that I received after my brother's death was a woman who came to me and she said, my husband was not a Christian, but he came to the memorial service when your brother died because I was a client of your brother. And at the memorial service, he became a Christian. Well, I think that's wonderful. But then she said these words to me, now we know why your brother had to die. That was not a good sentence. God could have saved that guy without my brother's death. Now, did God use my brother's death? Yeah, he did, but I don't agree with your theology.
People often try to comfort me by saying, well, your husband is in heaven, he's worshiping God, he's at the throne of grace.
Hey, everything's cool. Melissa's in heaven. Move on.
My sorrow has been wrapped up in our loss, in the change that we now have. We miss him. So our tears are for us. Our sadness is not over his eternity. Our sadness is over our present life.
Insensitive comments are unavoidable. So how should you respond?
With mercy.
Some of those comments they hurt. But at the same time, like I said, I know that they can't comprehend it.
My sister would say, God will only give you, as much as you can handle. And I thought, gosh, at that point in time, I just wanted to strangle her. And I'd look at her and I'd say, oh my God, if she only really knew. She has no idea what I'm going through right now. And I have to keep reminding myself that I used to be that same person too. Until you actually go through an experience, you have no idea really the stupid things you really say.
I think I was in college and I found out a friend's sister had been killed tragically in an accident. And I remember thinking, I hope I don't see my friend. I won't know what to say to her. Please, God, don't let me run into her on campus. Instead of looking to send a card, to seek her out, I was saying, oh, please, I hope I don't see her. How lousy is that?
Because God himself has been so merciful and patient with me when I have sinned against him, that becomes a model for us when others are just insensitive to us in the midst of our grief.
Find your comfort in God and don't depend on the people around you to be able to respond in a way that you may have preconceived in your mind. It's better to just accept it for what it is and then trust that whatever the reaction is, that you're going to receive all the grace and comfort that you need from God to deal with that.
Every once in a while, someone does something or says something that's unhelpful. But who can relate to this? There's no right thing to say. There's no right thing. There's nothing that's going to take away the pain. There's nothing that's going to bring the kind of relief that people are hoping to bring.
One of the ways that we care for others around us in the midst of our grief, we're also concerned about them, and we want to make their ministry to us as easy as it can be. So we don't expect perfection from other people.
Because we're walking through life together and nobody gets it right all the time. I don't get it right. And someday I'll be the one who will say or do something a little odd, unhelpful. And I'm going to need their forgiveness.
You may be blessed to know people who can identify with you because they've also experienced grief.
And hopefully, they're a source of comfort to you.
But sometimes, even those who are acquainted with grief can share truths that you're not quite ready for.
Sometimes people will share a truth with you that has meant a lot to them, but it feels like a slap in the face to you. And it's really hard to know how to respond, especially when you do have some sense that the person is trying to help you. And I think first you kind of have to make some sort of response to the other person. And sometimes all you can say is, thank you, I'll need to think about that for a while. But then you have to say to the Lord, Lord, that was too much for now. But help me to file it, and then please bring it out to me if there is a point where you want me to think about it.
The death of your loved one will affect your relationships, but that doesn't mean those relationships have to end. Carla's husband died suddenly of a heart attack. As she grieved his death, Carla discovered that if she was going to stay connected to her friends, she had to focus on what they still had in common.
There was a real temptation for me to define myself, now based on my differences with my friends instead of the things that we once held in common. When I define my friendships based on our differences and see myself as outside or so different, then I've really isolated myself. They didn't isolate me, I've done it myself. And truth is helpful. What we still share, what I still share with my friends, is that God is most important to us. We love God, love other people, and that although, there are many new things, many differences, the values that we have and the truth of God's Word doesn't change.
As Carla continues to heal, she's found that caring for her friends has also helped her maintain her relationships.
As we mourn, certainly I've seen this most in me and my daughter, you go through a period where people care for you profoundly. And the time comes, and it's different for everyone, where we're able to look back at the other people and care for them again. I find that those friendships that seemed to me to be suddenly so different are all still very much intact.
Ultimately, Carla's faith in God keeps her from giving up on her friends.
The truth is that God can equip other people to care for us. So I just want to be grateful for their friendship and give them room to grow in this thing just like we're growing in this thing. I would rather walk through life with our friends and suffer an occasional unhelpful attempt than walk through this without them. So I'm grateful for their care.
Carla's attitude toward her friends is a great example of maintaining friendships after the death of a loved one.
Carla could have chosen to isolate herself, magnify the differences with her friends, and take serious offense to their well-meaning but insensitive comments.
Instead, she decided to fight to stay connected, and now she's enjoying the fruit of those efforts.
And we hope this session has encouraged you to do the same.
Don't forget about this week's grief work exercises. They offer practical steps you can take to move forward in your healing. This week's grief work will help you to prepare to respond to insensitive comforters. At the next session of GriefShare, we'll address the why question.
It seemed impossible that God would let the story end this way.
I felt like God had betrayed me.
And I'm asking God things like, why didn't you just stop this from happening?
We're so glad you joined us today. But before we go, there's one important family relationship that we didn't mention. It's your relationship with your grieving child or teen.
To help you with this important issue, we've included some suggestions for caring for grieving children in your workbook. You can find them at the end of this week's note-taking section.
And if you'd like, you can go online to griefshare.org and watch our video, How to Care for Grieving Children and Teens. It's a 40-minute video, just like this one, that explains what children and teenagers are dealing with after their loss.
If you have other questions about how to help grieving children, talk to your group leader. He or she may be aware of some resources that could help you.
Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.